All right, so we'll call to order here at 7:04. Frank Lynham also will be joining us, as I mentioned earlier. So everybody got a chance to get a copy of the agenda by email? Does anybody not have the agenda?
Good, Rick.
All right, so reserve fund stands at $30,314. Public forum is temporarily suspended. So under new business, we are going to take a look at perhaps a revenue forecasting spreadsheet. Talk a little bit about the Whitman Hanson Regional High School assessment. I'll probably give a little bit of a report for anyone that didn't get an opportunity to see the latest school committee meeting last week. Warrant articles, we do have a new summary sheet that John forwarded to the committee members this week. And if we have an opportunity for subcommittee reports, if there's anything new. And then, you know, what we'll do is we'll do a pass through Article 2. Again, the Article 2, does everybody have the newest Article 2 that was sent out yesterday? Does anybody not have it? It's dated March 30th. So last week we were using the one from March 24th, and now we're going to compare that one that we used before with the latest March 30th. And there are some changes that Frank implemented, and when he comes on, he'll explain. Welcome, Ralph.
Well, glad to be here.
Okay, so we have everybody in attendance at this point. Also, we do have meeting minutes that got emailed late this afternoon. If everybody didn't get an opportunity to read it, we can table them. Again, we talked about perhaps getting the meeting minutes, and I understand Samantha's difficulty, you know, with the situation and trying to get meeting minutes a little earlier. It will help if we do have them at least a couple of days early, so we can get to the point where everybody has reviewed the meeting minutes and is prepared to either make amendments or accept them as presented. So, does anybody not have a copy of the March 24th meeting minutes that was sent out today? So everybody has a copy?
No, I don't have the minutes.
I haven't gotten a chance to review them.
Okay. So you do, does everybody have a copy that they could review or
I
not?
don't.
Okay.
Rick, I don't, Rick.
I've
Okay.
had to make notes because everything's on my computer that you guys are on right now. So I've made notes from, not from the meeting minutes, but from the Article 2. I don't
All right,
have it
so-
in front of me.
I certainly don't have a problem tabling the meeting minutes. This is only 2 meetings ago. It's not like we're that far behind. So what you should do if you have an opportunity to download the meeting minutes from March 24th, and we'll review them at next week's meeting. If we have an opportunity to get the next set of meeting minutes from the 31st, we could then approve 2 sets of meeting minutes at our next meeting next week. So, all right. So, welcome, Frank. Frank is on meeting as well, and it will be an opportunity for us to take a look at the latest documents that were emailed out today. And perhaps you can give us some insight, Frank, as to the changes that took place from the Article 2 that we reviewed last week and the Article 2 that we have in front of us today. So that one is dated March 30th. Frank, you have a copy up on your computer?
Yeah, I do. The changes, I'm just trying to bring it up on my computer right now. But if you've distributed them, the changes are primarily in the 2021 column requested. All of those lines that are union positions are marked. It's either, if you have a black and white, it's a little X. If you have a color, it's a red X. Those X's indicate that those positions are union positions under a collective bargaining agreement. And until we reach an agreement, we do not enter appropriation requests for those lines, because that would serve to predetermine what we were going to do. The only agreement we currently have is the MOA with the fire department, which provides for a 2% raise. The line items that are non-union are all identified for 2%. You can see it on your worksheet. So those positions that are in either the library, the town hall, public works, or police are all under collective bargaining agreements, and those agreements, until they're renewed, stand as they are. And when you look at your comparison from 20 to 21 on those specific union lines, which is evident on first page in the clerical numbers, you will see that in most cases, the FY 2021 request is lower than the FY 20 request. The reason for that is all of those bargaining unit people are hourly for contract purposes, as opposed to the exempt employees who get an annual salary regardless of the work schedule. So in the year 2021, depending on whether they work Monday to Friday, Monday to Thursday, or some other schedule, there are 2 to 3 less work days in fiscal 21 than in fiscal 20. So if we don't enter into an agreement, in most cases, you're going to see the appropriation slightly lower than it was the previous year. Now, the other updates, there were a number of lines that, for whatever reason, were not accurate. So I went back to correct those as well.
All right, maybe if we take the time, Frank, to go line by line where you have changes. Do you have a copy of it up now?
Yeah, I will in a second.
Okay.
21.
Well, Frank's getting that up. I think the other documents that we're going to be working with tonight, and let me know if you don't have a copy of the warrant summary sheet. It's a one-page sheet, and it looks like this. So that's another thing that we're going to just take a rundown. We are obviously, as we discussed last week, going to wait for a recommendation from the Capital Committee for capital articles. So, Dave, you're meeting Thursday, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So would be more in tune to work on recommendations for warrant articles following the meeting of the Capital Committee. So that way we can get the recommendation out of that committee for.
Okay, finally, I do have it up.
Okay. All right. So again, we're looking at Article 2, fiscal year 2021, version 5, dated 3/30/2020. And the first notation is on line 27 on page 1. Does everybody have a copy in front of them? So the position is assistant accountant, and you have that one asterisked.
Right. As you can see in 2020, the salary line was 42,508. If there were no change made, if we didn't enter into a new agreement by the time we arrive at town meeting, the salary for 2021 would be 42,222, which is less because of the number of work days in the year.
So that would be our recommendation then, the requested 2021, if in fact we were going to concur with the department.
Well, again, this isn't a department budget. This is a selectman's budget. The departments don't bargain with their employees.
Right. Okay.
The number that you see to the right under the 2% line is what the number would be if we negotiated a contract that included a 2% increase. But absent an agreement, the request on Article 2 will read what the current number is for 2021.
Being 42,222.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Does everybody understand that? Is there any questions regarding how that is being calculated based on the fact that the collective bargaining agreements have not been negotiated or ratified? Rosemary?
Just a question. I thought that we kept those in line with whatever the contracted salaries were. So they're just going to stay at 2% and not be in line with whatever the union or contracted salaries.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Clerical, I thought you tried to keep all payments in line with union. So if you have a non-union clerical, you pay them the same rate as a union clerical. Is that correct or incorrect?
That is the basis we've used for negotiating, yes.
Okay.
The Board of Selectmen have offered, and the fire department union has agreed to a contract that provides a 1-year term and an increase of 2%.
Okay.
We will not penalize those employees who are not represented by unions if the union is unprepared to bargain.
Okay. Thank you.
Chuck, did you have a question?
No, that was from my wife. I wasn't unmuted.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. So line 36, administrative assistant, same thing, right?
Correct. And 37.
And 37. And then 46, benefits clerk. Same thing.
My computer jumps 2 pages at a time, yes.
So 46 through 50 all fall into that category. Same exact reason.
Yes, now if you look at clerical level 2, line 49, is it 49 or I can't see across this.
48 jumps 4.9%. Is that the one you want to talk about? 48 is clerical treasurer.
Yes. Each of these contracts has a step raise from years 1 through 5. The next step raise is year 10, and the final step raise is year 15. So if an employee matriculates through the step process, at year 5, they're capped on steps and would receive only whatever COLA is offered until year 10. At year 10, they have a step raise in addition to whatever COLA is offered. And the same is true for year 15. So you, in these lists, you're going to see a couple of lines where even without a contract, the numbers will go up because they are still entitled to the provisions of the contract, which include the step raise.
So, for instance, line 48 with a 4.9% increase would be at year 10 or year 15.
Correct.
One or the other is what
That's correct.
resulted in that raise. Yeah.
And John, if you look at the worksheet I sent you, you'll find embedded in the worksheets a calculation sheet that shows the actual annual calculation for each of those salaries. I don't know if, I don't think I've dropped the most recent one into your share drive, but I will as soon as I'm finished working with it.
Okay.
So Frank, before we continue on as well, so additionally, any employee that's retiring would also have some calculation in there to
No,
offset.
no, we don't have any, we don't have any agreement for additional pay when they sever. The only thing that an employee might receive is unused vacation time. The contracts, for the most part, limit vacation carryover to between 5 and 9 days. And that, and without even the necessity of saying it, was a result of seeing a couple of really screwball situations over the last few years.
Yep, I think we all remember those. All right, so any questions so far for anybody?
Yes. Question was, would that also include unused sick time?
No,
Okay, just want to be sure.
no one is compensated for unused sick time. Back up a minute. There is a provision in the town hall employee contract that incentivizes people to not use sick time. If they use no sick time, and I'll have to look at the numbers, but I believe it's 5 days pay. If they use 4, it's 1. If they use 1, it's 4. If they use 2, it's 3. If they use 3 or more, it's 0. And that's an annual incentive to get people not to call in sick. But there's no accrual and no benefit for sick time when you're in your employment.
Does that answer your question, Ralph?
Yes, that does answer the question.
Thank
Can I
you.
ask you a question, Rick?
Yes, go ahead.
See, I thought that's the new rule going forward with any new hires, correct?
That rule is in place for everyone.
Okay. When did that go in place?
I want to say last June.
No, that went effective for new hires or past
Well,
hires?
no, the only difference between current and new hires
Yeah,
is persons hired after January 1st of 2020 earn vacation time throughout the year. Anyone hired prior to that is credited with their vacation time on July 1st of the fiscal year. The changes wouldn't really have much of an effect on that. The real effect is that by establishing that policy, it's given us a little leverage to negotiate with certain other people.
sure. So we still have employees that are grandfathered, I would imagine, correct?
Yes, but even under their grandfathering, they're limited to what they can carry in sick time.
Okay, no, that's all I wanted to ask, Frank. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so moving to line 68 and 69, we have the assistant clerk and clerical. Both of those have a asterisk.
Right, and they are, the asterisk simply means they're union positions.
Okay,
And then the attendant consequence of that is how the salary is calculated for fiscal 21 with no agreement and fiscal 21 with the new agreement.
okay. Moving to line 85.
Okay, I put an asterisk there because we continually carry a number for that salary and it goes up every year. And this year, I received a request via memo from the chairman of the planning board to allow for an increase in salary, and as he indicated, because the incumbent had not received a salary increase in 3 years. Now, that was not a result of funding. That was a result of no one putting in for an increase. So I went back and I looked at the history for that account. Let me pull it up. Okay. Just give me a second to open. It's a large sheet. Okay. Almost there. God, this reminds me what the computers were like before we updated them. All right, so in that particular category, I looked at the history for the last 3 years. Even though we funded the position at 6,000 plus, in 2017, we expended $1,842. In 2018, we expended $2,000. In 2019, we expended $2,167, and so far this year, through when I calculated, I think it was February, we've expended $1,261. Doesn't make any sense to appropriate $6,000 if we're never going to use it. So I reduced that number to 4. It's still more than we need, but it leaves room if everything went to hell in a handbasket.
Okay. Does everybody understand that?
Yep.
Okay, line 123. Police, all the services. You have. And
Now,
if,
the chief requested $2,571, and that appears in the right column. However, level funding, if there were no contract, would remain at $2,521,000.
so that's been changed from the worksheet that we had last week.
The request has been changed to level funding.
And you have a note on line 133, all other services fire.
In all of the services, the budget with the 2% increase that Chief Grenner was requesting is $3,049,000. So that will go into the requested line. I just haven't changed it yet.
Okay. So that line, that's the second to last column, is going to be moved to the requested 2021
Right.
when you update the worksheet.
The last column is just a worksheet. It has no impact except for my calculations and trying to project out what we may need.
Okay. Line one.
Rick, can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, sorry.
Going back to the line 123, the police, you have been in all the other lines for the clerical workers when putting the 2% into the 2%, you know, the number, what the dollar amount would be if the 2% raise was added.
Right.
In the police line, you say you have 2% in there, but it's only like 50,000 more. So is that number not 2% of what it was last year? That's not the right percentage, is it?
Well, in that particular line, you have to remember that you have 26 people, all at different rates of pay, all with different educational requirements, and everything is funded in that line. Uniform allowance, education, Quinn bill, base salary,
Right. But my question
differential
is,
and overtime.
my question is when the actual contract is signed and it's 2% higher than what it was last year, where is that money going to go in? Where are we going to get that money from? Because that 2571414 is not 2% of 2520994, is it?
There it is.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
I just,
Sorry. Okay.
And
Never
John, you know, when you're dealing with a line that has 25, 26 people in it,
Yeah.
there were so many variables, and the line typically generates some return to the general fund at the end of the year. So it's not practical or possible to count that to the dollar the
No,
way
I
we
just-
do with individual lines.
I just thought the math was off, but Kathleen
Okay.
corrected
no,
me,
it's
so I'm all set.
2%, precisely.
Okay.
All right, we good with that line? Okay, John, thank you. Line 175. This is the operating expense for the Whitman Hanson Regional School District.
Okay, what I have entered in there just for calculation purposes is what our assessment would be based on the statutory method with 4 teachers added. That's what that number would look like.
So this is one of the budget proposals that was laid out by the superintendent at the
Yeah.
last budget meeting. There were 2
Correct.
scenarios. And basically, the reason why he laid out place setters was because the committee wasn't prepared or willing to move forward with voting an assessment.
Correct. And then the number to the right is what the 4% would be.
Okay. So is everybody aware of the situation with the regional school district, the school committee, and where they are right now in the recommendation process? Right, correct me if I'm wrong, but the school committee is obligated to make a recommendation 30 days before our town meeting, right?
That's correct.
Now, they've been also given an alternative date of April 30th. But if Whitman is moving forward with our town meeting on May 4th, that would require the school committee to make a recommendation for an assessment next week.
Correct.
So in watching this school committee meeting, the last school committee meeting, it seems as there's a reluctance still with the members of the school committee from Hanson on making a recommendation or voting an assessment until the process, I guess, that has been initiated to come to some type of a compromise. It is their expectation that there is still hope that there'll be some type of a compromise with what is going to be required to pay for this assessment by the town of Hanson. So, Justin, are you still with us?
No, he's not. He
Oh.
stepped away, he said.
Oh, okay.
Rick,
Right.
if I were Karnak, I'd say yes. The last meaningful discussion we had at the school committee meeting, I believe we left with, give us a number and we'll look at it and we'll work with it. What they're doing now is they're asking us to tell them what that number should be. At least that's what I got out of the last school committee meeting. I know that they also requested that the superintendent, myself, and John Stanbrook collaborate. And to what end, I'm not sure. I have not been able to bring the 3 of us together. Jeff was unavailable one day, and we were going to conference yesterday and today, and in both cases, the Hanson administrator has been out sick. So we're
Okay.
shooting for tomorrow. I believe he asked for 1 o'clock.
All right, so are you aware of any type of a compromise that has been thrown out there or
No.
proposed? No.
No.
And And I believe the chairman of the Board of Selectmen from Hanson texted into the meeting with the school and said that really they have made no meaningful progress because of obviously the the situation with the COVID-19. And so here we are at the 11th hour looking for an assessment so we can continue to work on our Article 2. So I would suspect then that if there's no knowledge or of a compromise, as difficult as it is to say, that I mean, Hanson should move forward with figuring out a way to pay their assessment.
Yes, I agree. Presumably, and I have no reason, they've given me no reason to think this, but just looking at it logically, the fact that Hanson has already voted to move their town meeting to June 15th indicates to me that they expect there to be some time to negotiate on this. We have not, the Board of Selectmen has not acted on any change in town meeting. And while we'll meet next Tuesday, and I'm sure that will be one of the items on the agenda for discussion, I don't know that there's a strong sentiment to move forward, to move the town meeting beyond where we are. And the only thing that might cause that consideration is if there are more significant and drastic changes made by the governor's office or some other entity that will affect us financially.
So we're already making steps, and again, by continuing to do the work on the budget, the Finance Committee is moving in concurrence with the recommendation to leave town meeting where it is.
I would
So-
say yes.
The other part, it did seem at the school committee meeting that they were looking for a sense of the town, and I don't know if, a formal vote of the Finance Committee will help them decide when they need to move on from waiting for some type of a compromise. But I don't know, get a sense of the committee here. Is there any appetite for moving forward with an assessment that includes funding some or partial of Hanson's obligation? Does anybody on this committee feel strongly that that's a direction that we should be going as the Whitman Finance Committee?
I would say no.
I would have to concur and say no also.
What was the question again, quickly?
Well, the school committee is locked into a deadlock where they think that there's some hope or a compromise in this upcoming assessment. And I think they made it clear that they were looking for a response from the town to say, well, there is none. In the absence of none, then they should be looking and should probably consider assembling a Proposition 2.5 override evaluation committee as the town of Whitman did. So
I think we sent a letter. We sent, as far as Finance Committee goes, we sent a letter saying that we won't advocate for anything but statutory, correct?
Well, and I can't see anything that this board, any of the members of this board are thinking about rethinking that position.
No, but maybe it's time to reinforce that because they've been sitting around getting not much done. Like you said, Rick, they're hoping for compromise, but if we're not going to compromise and we want them to pay their fair share, maybe something needs to happen for them to start acting on that.
Well,
Well, I think that the vote of the Finance Committee the last time when we were asked for our position was that the Finance Committee will not recommend to town meeting any assessment that includes anything other than using the statutory method. But I think we could take it to another level and say that the Finance Committee of Whitman will not recommend to the voters any assessment that includes a subsidization to any neighboring town. I mean, if they're really looking for us to nail it down, I think we should be prepared to make that statement.
I would agree to that.
So Rick, My
Okay.
sense is that initially, I went to the Regional Agreement Amendment Committee back in December, the one meeting that they had, and the two selectmen, one from Hanson and one from Whitman, said we should disband this committee and see what we can come up with for a compromise. So that's where this whole notion of compromise came from. Nothing has happened from it. And Laura Kemet was pretty clear at the last meeting, there isn't going to be a compromise. And so the school committee has to vote a budget. They can do what they want with the budget, but they have to vote a budget and then give it to the finance committees for both each town to decide whether or not they support it. But they've got to make a vote. And there's no compromise coming from Whitman. I think Whitman taxpayers who are finding out about this statutory method are probably chomping at the bit that we've already paid $4 million that Hanson should have had statutory been in place for the past 5 years. So we're not going to go into a 6th year of paying any of their money. And they've known about this. They've been dreading the day that people in Whitman found out about statutory. There's no doubt in my mind.
Great point,
Well,
Kathleen.
I can comment from the perspective of a couple of meetings that Hanson and Whitman did actually have. The suggestion at the meeting that Kathleen is referring to from the chairman of the Hanson Board of Selectmen was, in passing, well, what if you did a third, and a third to catch up? And at that point, I believe Randy Lamatina's response to it was, we expect to go fully statutory this year. They then asked to meet as a group, the TAs from the two towns and 2 selectmen from each town, and no progress was made. I have asked, my question being, what is Hanson looking to do? And Hanson's response is, well, what are you prepared to do? And that's not the way I negotiate.
No.
Right,
And I
we're
don't
looking to
know-
soften the blow, that's all.
I honestly don't know that there's anything to negotiate. I think that the decision to go statutory is based on everything we know that the intent of funding provides for. And to do anything other than that would compromise the Whitman taxpayer. And while we might be able to find some meeting ground on things that are outside of the assessment, I'm not even sure there's anything there. One of the comments that Mr. O'Brien made, and I went through that meeting again yesterday just to make sure I understood what the point of my meeting with the superintendent and Hanson was. Mr. O'Brien made the statement that we haven't done anything about taking snow removal into our budget. And, you know, that was never a part of the proposal. That was something he suggested 2 meetings ago as a way to free up more money for the schools. But that wasn't even on the table, and it isn't now. So what happens as you drag this thing out, people get fixated in ideas that this is what we should be doing, and we're getting nowhere.
Yeah, well, the time is I think the time is up, really. I think it's unfortunate, really, that the hope and the expectation that some type of a compromise loomed around the next corner really didn't help this entire budget process at all, in my estimation. But, well, that's where we are. I would expect then we hear that a recommendation will be voted next week, Frank, with a 30-day window closing. Is that correct?
I would expect that's what they're going to do, but based on what I've seen so far, I'm really not sure that's what's going to happen.
So it was
The
the
30-day
Hanson
window-
members of the. Go ahead, John.
The 30-day window is this Friday. So if they don't vote it tomorrow night, then they're not going to make it. So because our meeting is on May 4th, tomorrow's April 1st. Friday is April 3rd. So if they don't vote it by Friday, then I don't know what happens then. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that's ever happened in the Commonwealth that a school committee hasn't voted a budget. But I know the deadline is Friday. So they have to vote it tomorrow night or schedule another meeting for Friday if they don't.
Right. You're right. There's no instance of a school committee ever not delivering a budget to their appropriating
So,
partners.
so in the meeting you mentioned, it was two, between the two selectmen. What was said was not this year, but next year. And I think what Rick is saying, that we use statutory consistently and that there is no funding other towns' finances.
Well, what that selectman,
Because
yeah, sorry,
that was a Whitman selectman that said that.
right. What that selectman suggested was we move forward with statutory, we review our agreement, and if we can come up with any other type of agreement, that would happen in the future, not today. And I think that's pretty much where he left it.
Okay. All right, so the place center that we have, Frank, is 5.3%. So the recommendation from the
And again,
Madden report,
that's just a plug-in number based
right,
on what was discussed in the previous school committee meeting.
right. So all I'm saying is, our Madden recommendation includes, not to exceed 5%, but it does also give the finance committee a little bit of a leeway, if in fact there was a year that needed to be adjusted slightly. And I think actually that was the wording specifically from the Budget Override Evaluation Committee, which was enacted and acted on, then subsequently acted on by the Board of Selectmen. So 5% really is the number, but I certainly don't object to having a 5.3 if the school, the district can make a case for the fact that 4 teachers are going to be rehired. I think, extenuating circumstances included the fact that teachers were laid off last year. So a case could be made for a slight overage to the 5%.
Well, if you look at the total all schools is 4.7. So we are 5% for all schools.
Right.
And the regional is only 5.1 total for the region. So I think we're comfortable in that all schools 4.7. We're in good shape there.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from anybody regarding the assessment or lack thereof from the school committee?
Good.
Okay. So moving on through Article 2, we are at now line 199, Frank.
Is it back there?
Just with a notation on line 199 that the clerical,
Right. The 199 again is a union position. And in that case, you see that even on a level funded or non-contract basis, it's going up. That's because that's a new employee who's still in the step ranges.
okay. All right. Then we have in line 227, youth services librarian,
Okay.
union position.
Again, it's a union position, same rules apply, but there is a step associated with that. And the next one below it, that person is maxed out, so there's no step. And the senior library technician is also maxed out, so there's no step,
Step.
so she actually goes lower.
Okay. All right, and then the notation on page 10 of 11, line 414, union salaries clerical. Same thing, union position.
Yeah, I have to look a little harder at that one. because I didn't verify that number. And it's a pretty big jump.
The 5.1% jump over the previous year,
Yeah,
right?
let me take a look at my worksheet, because I started working on these over the weekend. And actually, that was the next one to work, and that was my last one. I didn't get to it.
All right. Well, we're going to revisit this next week anyway. I think we still have an adequate amount of time within the next 3 meetings to do a comprehensive review of Article 2. I think it would benefit us from having the recommendation from the Capital Committee before we move too far into making recommendations for town meeting, specifically for line items, knowing that we also can reconsider lines as well. I mean, we have that process, but I mean, to streamline the process, we typically just go and vote the lines that aren't questioned and then go back and look at each individual line and then have a discussion and, maybe make adjustments to some of these lines as we go. So Frank, on the last page, you do have a note, and basically it's that the X reflects the no raise, but steps due under contract. And where 2021 is less than 2020, it reflects less work days in 2021 versus 2020. So that's the reasoning behind when the line goes down.
Correct.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the changes that occurred during the week from the Article 2 we reviewed last week and the Article 2 that's before you?
No.
No.
Good.
Okay. All right. I think at this point, we could probably do a quick pass through the warrant. Does everybody have a copy of either or both the warrant and the summary sheet?
Yep.
Frank, we go through the warrant. Could you give a little bit of background on any of the funding sources or suggestions that you have made notes on this summary sheet?
Do you have the worksheet that shows? Yeah. So
Everybody has this worksheet.
that reflects, there's a couple of things in there that you have to think about. The intent this year is to, because of the circumstances surrounding the ability to hold town meetings with limitations in how many people we can effectively work with at a town meeting. The annual town meeting has a quorum of 50 voters, 50. The special town meeting has a quorum of 150 voters. And ironically, at least at the start, the special town meeting has more urgency because all of those transactions are typically still in the current year that only has 2 months to go. So it becomes very important to work those numbers. So after consulting with counsel, I'm going to present a warrant to the selectmen that will include all articles, both the annual and special, with a clear notation that the items for the special town meeting are appropriations for the year we're currently in, whereas the items for the annual will take effect on July 1st of the following fiscal year, so that people are clear as to which funds they're working with as they vote articles. Most of the articles in the special are going to be driven by free cash because we can't raise and appropriate. I've also moved, for the sake of expediency, the article for the feasibility study into the special so we can address that before we start ratcheting down the annual warrant. So I'm still drafting it. The warrant closed today, and the capital items are going to be discussed on Thursday. So by next week, we should have a perfunctory or rough outline of what the warrant will reflect. There are a couple of unknown numbers that still have to be resolved that relate to costs, such as the feasibility study for the DPW or the cost for the strategic planning article. But we at least have the article intent stated and should be able to identify those numbers before you're ready to vote them.
Okay,
Rick, I have a question.
go ahead.
Frank, Article P7, reserve for purchase ambulance and equipment. Is that to purchase a new ambulance?
No, that is to begin accruing money for the purchase of an ambulance and purchase of equipment. That number is still a moving number, but that's what the fire chief has requested be set aside each year in order to build up the funds to purchase an ambulance and to do equipment rehab with another piece of equipment. And there are things he's going to have to talk about.
Okay, yeah, because that's 190,000. I mean, that's 90,000 more than John Madden had recommended for that amount. He had recommended 160.
Well, the other thing you want to bear in mind is he was recommending strictly for the ambulance. There are other capital purchases that are in the way of protective equipment that will have to ultimately come out of those capital funds as well. And my view, although it's not a decision yet, my view is if we're going to provide a capital accumulation for the purchase of ambulance and equipment, it should only be that. We shouldn't be seeing articles on both sides of the table. And it's certainly less than we have spent in the past for fire. But again, something to be discussed.
Right. I'm assuming you'll discuss that on Thursday in detail with the
I
capital committee?
expect we will do that, yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
That's if Dave is up to the discussion.
Dave is ready. Right?
I am ready, yes.
So Thursday is the day for the capital committee to meet. And you suspect that you will have a recommendation at the end of one meeting?
I don't know how Dave feels about it. I think we'll make a lot of progress, but we'll probably need a second meeting to
We don't fool around
review
with that
everything.
meeting.
Say again, Dave?
There's a really good chairman in that meeting. We don't fool around.
Yeah, he's all business, I'm sure. So looking at our upcoming meeting schedule, we have the 7th of April, the 14th of April, and Frank, perhaps we could reserve the 21st for a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen, although we're not always too welcoming to joint meetings with the
Oh,
finance.
sure we are. We even gave you a table the last time.
Yeah, I know, we had
We
to
don't need
fight
a
for it.
table now.
We gotta bring our own.
Rick, if I may address the committee on a process question.
Sure.
The dates you've mentioned are all dates we will still be virtually sheltered in place, and we'll be meeting electronically. I wonder if it might be convenient for the group that's meeting to look at times other than 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night, because that was always based on meeting availability, meeting room, and dates, where we don't have an opportunity for the public to come in and we don't have a room limitation, you might survey your committee as to whether there's a better time or better day or both to hold meetings.
Yeah, I certainly entertain a different hour. Does anybody have any objections to meeting earlier instead of
Oh,
7 o'clock?
Sunday at 8 o'clock in the evening.
Sunday's God's day. I don't know about that.
Sunday? Is that what you said, Al?
Sunday,
Yeah.
8 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah,
Al-
you're on.
Al
you
is
can-
gonna set up a lemonade stand outside his house on Forest Ave.
You
And
come-
we're all gonna
Frank.
stand 6 feet apart.
That's all right, Frank. Come on by.
I think
So
it'd be something different than lemonade, though.
Yeah.
It's got to be some hard lemon.
Nobody said it was soft.
Move Al's truck. It's always in the way.
Oh, thank you. Here, go Tigro, Dave, huh?
All right, so I'm going to throw out there the time of 4 o'clock. Does anybody have a problem with 4 o'clock?
I'm still homeschooling 2 children around that time. We're finishing
Okay.
up the day. So 5, I should be
Yeah.
settled, but we're still doing 5 is,
5 works for me.
Kathleen?
Five would work here too.
5. I see a lot of 5s.
5.
I'll work with you, Rick, on it. I may have to jump off, though. It's like I'm in the healthcare industry. It's the coronavirus everywhere, so.
Yeah,
well,
okay.
is it a problem? Is 7 o'clock better for you? I mean,
No, it's best time.
3 a.m. is actually the best for me, but I'm obviously deferring to the majority of the committee, so. 5 p.m. works fine, but Al, did you say doesn't work out for you, Al?
No, that's fine. I'll jump in. So if I'm in and out, so I might have to turn my phone over. With
Oh,
conference
yeah,
calls,
yeah.
so.
Yep, no problem. So Tuesday, we'll leave the day the same, but move to an earlier time.
Sure.
I step away for a second.
Okay. Okay. All right, so I did write a posting for tonight's meeting, but I can retrieve it. It's actually still in the window in front of the clerk's office. So I could change the time for next week's meeting to 5 o'clock,
Okay.
if that's amenable to everybody. Frank,
Yep.
does that seem better to you? Is that what you're looking
It
for?
really doesn't matter to me, particularly where we're meeting virtually. I'm just thinking in terms of the convenience for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the
My
other,
guess is the selectmen are gonna wanna meet earlier in the day, which could work out well because I could be able to attend both.
that would be good. All right, so we're gonna move the meeting to 5 o'clock next week and until further notice, as long as we're meeting virtually. All right, so, John, do you want to talk a little bit about your revenue forecasting spreadsheet? Is there some feedback that you got from,
The numbers that I had, I compared numbers with the town accountant on yesterday, and the sheet that you got emailed actually came from Frank, and we're, aside from, a few numbers, we're pretty much on target. We're pretty much the same. I think that the big thing that Frank brought up yesterday, and it's highlighted on the sheet that did get sent out, is that it sounds like, and I'll let Frank, Frank looks like he's busy, so I'll explain it. It looks like the cherry sheet receipts that we're getting from the state, there's a good potential that we're going to be 10% less than what we were originally told. That's $300,000. So that's going to hurt us a little bit, obviously, by losing that revenue. There's also some concern regarding local receipts with the specifics regarding the COVID-19. Obviously, meal taxes are going to be way down. There's going to be some issues regarding people, excise taxes not getting paid or delayed. There could be issues of even people's real estate taxes getting delayed. I believe that's what Frank, maybe you can outline a little bit more, the
Sure, I can.
150,000 you were talking about.
Yes. The number that's being passed around right now at the state level is a reduction in state aid of 10%. That number could be less, it could be more. Right now, the state is experiencing a significant reduction in lottery revenues, which feed the vast majority of what we get in our cherry sheets. The other issue is that the local receipts, real estate receipts are done on an accrual basis. So when we set our budget, we set a tax rate, we determine how much revenue we're going to bring in for tax, and that becomes our income. If people don't pay, it doesn't change what we recognize as income until the property goes into tax title. Then that money is backed out of revenue and we start to accrue for it in the overlay account because we may never see that money. In most cases we do because it's real estate, but when it comes to excise tax, we generally write off between 5 and 7% of our excise tax. And the reason for that is it's difficult to collect, and we'd have to sue people and go to small claims court to get judgments, and it's simply not something we'll do. So it's more cost effective to write those off, mark those records, and eventually when someone goes to renew their license or registration, they say, aha, we got you. You can't do it till you pay these. But over the years, I've seen us write off a couple of $100,000 in revenue from that, not in 1 year, but accumulatively. The other problem we're going to have is the excise tax that we assess on vehicles. Right now, cars, surprisingly, are not selling. So we're not going to see the typical growth, particularly if this goes on for another couple of months, that we normally see in subsequent commitments. We also will have unpaid excise taxes, which once again are on a cash basis. We don't accrue for those. We recognize them when they come in. So potentially, we could see, pick a number, it's a 1.9 million. It could be up to $200,000 lost, certainly 150 in excise tax over the year.
Yeah, our revenue for motor vehicle excise, our estimate is $1.8 million. So if we're going to lose 10% of that, so that's where, that's something that we'll need to consider. And obviously, I think it's going to impact the capital committee a lot more than it might attack Article 2, but maybe we can make some considerations in Article 2 as we move forward to think about what we want to do. I think another thing we need to possibly think about is a couple meetings ago, we voted to fund the middle school feasibility out of free cash. And I think that's something that we need to consider and think about if that's still the best way to do it, if we're going to lose close to $500,000 worth of forecasted revenue going forward.
Was I mistaken? But a lot of that's we're getting back, right, from the state. The feasibility study is replaced.
40%, I think, is the number, or 38%, I think, is the number. So it's not a lot. It's 38%.
38 to 44 was what Ernie had said.
Yeah, so somewhere in between there.
Ernie's come up with another number too, so Rick will talk about that.
Yeah, he did say following our vote last meeting, when we voted to unanimously support the feasibility study out of available funds, he called and came up with a number that was in the 50s that he heard back from.
Oh, wow. That's what I had heard originally, that we got.
So we should get that confirmed with Ernie before we make any decisions on changing the course of our direction with this funding source, because yes, there are some concerns with revenues, and but there's also a concern with losing our place in line for this reimbursement.
Yeah, yes.
If we jeopardize that, we're not going to get back in line. Like Frank mentioned, he is petitioning the state to perhaps put a delay or a year hold on our position. But there are, the chances of that happening are, pretty unlikely, I think.
Did I
we did.
miss that announcement? I didn't hear anything about asking the state to delay.
Frank mentioned that today.
Let me explain what we have. The state has reached out to all of the managers to request things that they deem might be helpful to their community during this crisis. And one of the things that I requested was to see if there was some consideration, or would some consideration be given to communities who have been accepted but haven't begun the I'm looking for the word, the feasibility study process, to be permitted to keep a place in line but delay the action one fiscal year. I don't seriously think anything's going to come out of it, but I felt there'd be no harm in asking the question, which I did discuss with our state rep as well. Again, given the impact that this event is having on all the communities, I'm reasonably sure that those communities that were with us in this round would probably be willing to take a pause if they were willing to give it. The key is not jeopardizing our position and our opportunity.
Right. So, like I said, the position that we took last week was specifically to avoid losing our place in line. I think everybody was in agreement at that point. So, if there is some movement on the state level that we wouldn't lose our place in line, I mean, obviously, then that isn't an issue. So, but not a lot of time before we could get an answer on that.
And frankly, I'm not expecting one.
Okay.
They said think outside the box, and that's what we're doing right now.
Right. Yep. Okay. Any other questions on that, or any of the other items on the revenue summary? So just back on a related note, when I did watch the school committee meeting, the last school committee meeting, I mean, they're talking about giving credits for unused tuition and that type of thing. So, there are budgetary issues that affect not only the town, but all the town departments and the school committee included. So one of the other ideas that was floated around, Don Byers brought up to investigate additional sources for revenue, and then including imposing some user fees at the district level, and also for the town to consider doing something with non-mandated busing. So again, I mean, the last time we talked about this, it was like, well, it should come from the schools, but really that's a decision from the town. Justin, since we have you back, you have any position on doing anything with non-mandated busing with regard to the position of the Board of Selectmen?
Yeah, so I mean, most of the Finance Committee will remember last year when I spoke about that, asked the superintendent to take a look and see how feasible it was. I'd still like them to explore it. It's a source of revenue that, the town is paying that a lot of nearby towns don't. And I believe Don Byers, the last school committee meeting, mentioned a couple of regional school districts that had set up some sort of a system. So there's a method out there. It's a potential for user fees to offset some of the rising costs we see elsewhere in the school system. And I mean, we need to get creative with some of our solutions right now. So I think it's on the table.
So the superintendent definitely threw it back at the town. It is not a school committee issue. Non-mandated busing is an issue that needs to be decided or talked about within the town, because that's where the expense is. It's not a regional school district expense. It's a town expense. It's on our Article 2 as a separate line item. So,
Can I weigh in on this, Rick?
yes, go ahead, Kathleen.
It's my understanding that we're looking at $400,000 as in non-mandated school busing, and that's based on kids who potentially could ride the bus. It doesn't mean that we're spending $400,000 for kids to get on the bus. Grandparents drop their kids off at school, parents drop their kids off at school, they send them to early arrival. So I've asked Dawn how to come up with a census of how many kids would be impacted, because we all know that there are half-filled buses pulling up to the school or pulling down through the streets. So $400,000 is not chump change. It's a lot of money for us to be spending if we aren't really providing a service to a significant number of students. So there's a pay to ride, and there's also an opt-out for parents. And I really think it's a sore thumb sitting there waiting for us to hammer. Like, let's just knock it off. Or at least attempt to come up with a resolution so we're not spending $400,000 not busing kids who are being transported by other means anyway.
I concur with you, Kathleen. Awesome.
So, it's unlikely that we'd realize a $400,000 savings, but there definitely there's a potential for some of this revenue to offset some of the expenses at the district level. So, Justin, if you could commit to bringing this discussion before the Board of Selectmen, that would be helpful for moving it forward. That's all.
Yeah, we can discuss it. Frank, I don't know if the agenda's gone out next week. Can you ask Lori to add this in there somewhere?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead, John.
We did the same thing last year. I wasn't on the board last year, but we're in April. For us to think that we would seriously be able to have this in this year's coming budget is unrealistic.
I don't think anybody has that expectation.
Okay, I just wanted to just make sure. I mean,
That could be the negotiations with Hanson, right? They want to know that something's coming. Well, they are welcome to, take these steps and, have extra revenue. And we could do the same. So that could be part of the negotiations that they're looking at.
So I think this is just an opportunity to start the discussion. We are definitely not going to move that forward this calendar or fiscal year. There's absolutely no chance of that. But we've been talking about it for 4 years, so. All right. I think that pretty much does it for our agenda. Does anybody have anything that they would like to bring up before we? I think what the expectation is the information we're going to get back from the Capital Committee on the meeting on Thursday is going to guide us a little bit better for us to start making recommendations. But I think it would be premature to start voting line items on Article 2 unless someone is in a disagreement. So. Go ahead, Kathleen.
No, you're the boss.
Oh, no.
I'm with you.
There's 9 bosses. So, does anybody else have anything that they'd like to bring up on a new business?
No, great meeting, Rick.
All right, Al, I appreciate everybody's participation. I look forward to an earlier meeting next week. It'll give us a little bit more time to get some of the movement on Article 2, I think, and work out some of our recommendations for the warrant. All right, if there's no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you once again, Frank. Thanks for joining us, Justin. We appreciate you being here.
Don't we need to say who did it? Did you get who did that, Samantha?
I got Kathleen, but I don't have a second.
Yeah, just a reminder.
I'll second it. I second it.
Just a reminder, when you meet electronically, all votes have to be roll call.
Okay.
Okay.
So when we'll be thinking about that when we start Article 2, it's going to be a little onerous. That's why if you're going to question a line, make sure
You sure you want to?
question, because it's going to take some time doing a roll call vote on question line items on Article 2. That's going to consume quite a lot of time. So, all right, appreciate the suggestion. Thanks again. Be safe this week, and we'll see you next Tuesday at 5.
Okay.